I still remember how my hand shook when I reached for the door handle that night. I had not been on a real date in almost 3 years. Ever since my wife passed away, my world had been small and quiet, built around school mornings, packed lunches, bedtime stories, and a lonely couch after my son fell asleep. But that evening felt different. I had actually cleaned the apartment properly, lit a small candle on the kitchen counter, and even wore the good shirt I saved for special days. My son Jake was spending the night at my sister's place, which already made the apartment feel too quiet. I kept checking the clock, wondering if this had been a mistake. Dating apps always sounded better in theory. Still, Sophie and I had been talking for weeks. She was kind, funny, and patient with my slow replies. She knew I was a single dad and never once made me feel like that was a problem. When the knock came, my heart jumped. I took a breath, smiled to myself, and opened the door, already ready to say something charming. Sophie stood there holding her purse tightly, her eyes searching my face. She looked beautiful, but not relaxed. There was something tense in her shoulders, something uneasy in the way she stood. Before I could greet her properly, she leaned closer and whispered, "My kids are outside." For a second, I did not understand what she meant. My smile faded, and I looked past her into the dark parking lot. A car sat there with its engine off. I could feel my heart racing as my mind tried to catch up. She had never mentioned kids before, not once. "I'm sorry," she said quickly, her voice shaking. "I wanted to tell you, but every time I tried, I froze. I know this isn't fair to you." I stared at her, unsure what to say. So many thoughts rushed through my head at once. I had imagined dinner, laughter, maybe a quiet walk. Not this. Not children waiting in a car on a first date. "How many?" I asked softly. "2," she said. "A boy and a girl." She looked like she was bracing for rejection, and something about that hurt more than the surprise itself. I saw fear in her eyes, but also hope, like she had already risked everything just by coming here. "Why are they outside?" I asked. She swallowed. "Because I didn't know if you'd send us away." That word hit me hard. Us. Not them, not my kids. Us. I thought about Jake and how many times people had walked away the moment they heard I was a dad. I knew that look, that quiet fear of being unwanted. "Are they safe?" I asked. She nodded. "They're asleep, mostly." I stepped back without thinking. "Bring them in," I said. Her eyes widened. "Are you sure?" I nodded. "It's cold out there." She let out a breath I didn't realize she had been holding. She turned back toward the car, and a few moments later she returned carrying a small girl wrapped in a jacket. A boy followed quietly behind her, rubbing his eyes. They looked tired, confused, and cautious, like they were used to being ready to move again at any moment. "This is Emma," Sophie said softly, "and this is Noah." I knelt down to their level. "Hey," I said gently, "I'm Daniel. You can come inside." They didn't smile, but they nodded. I recognized that look immediately. Kids who had learned not to trust too quickly. My chest tightened. As soon as the door closed behind us, Sophie's guard finally cracked. She sat down on the edge of the couch, her shoulders dropping as if she had carried something heavy for too long. "I didn't plan this, I swear." "I believe you." She looked at me, then really looked at me, and her eyes filled with tears. "Their father doesn't know where we are. I just needed one normal evening. I didn't want to scare you away." That was the moment I realized this date was never just a date. Whatever Sophie was running from, it had followed her here. And without meaning to, I had already opened the door to more than I expected. I looked at the kids curled up on the couch and felt something shift inside me. I didn't know what would happen next, but I knew one thing for sure. I was not going to ask them to leave. After the kids settled on the couch, the apartment felt different. It was no longer the quiet space I had prepared for a simple date. It felt full, almost crowded, but in a way that reminded me of real life. Emma had fallen asleep almost immediately, her head resting on Sophie's shoulder. Noah stayed awake, sitting stiffly, watching me like he was trying to decide if I was safe. I brought out blankets and placed one carefully over them. Sophie whispered a thank you so soft it barely reached me. We moved to the kitchen, keeping our voices low, like we were guests in our own space. "I should explain," she said, her hands wrapped tightly around a mug of tea I had just made. "You don't owe me anything," I said. She shook her head. "I do. My ex controls everything. Where we go, where we sleep, who I talk to. Tonight was the first time in a long while that I didn't ask permission." I leaned against the counter, listening. I had learned long ago that sometimes the best thing you can do for someone is not interrupt. "He hasn't hurt us," she said quickly, like she felt the need to protect him even now. "Not directly, but he watches, he follows. The kids have learned to stay quiet when he gets angry." My jaw tightened. I could feel a familiar anger rising in my chest, the same anger I felt whenever someone threatened my son's sense of safety. "Is he looking for you?" I asked. She nodded slowly. "Maybe not tonight, but soon." We stood there in silence for a moment. I could hear Noah shifting on the couch. I walked back over and asked if he wanted some water. He nodded again, the smallest movement. When I handed him the glass, his fingers brushed mine, and I could feel how cold they were. "Your place is nice," he said quietly. "Thank you," I replied, smiling. That small comment did more to calm my nerves than anything else. Kids didn't say things like that unless they meant them. Later, after the kids were both asleep, Sophie and I sat on opposite sides of the couch. The space between us felt heavy with everything unsaid. "I was really excited about tonight," she confessed. "You made me feel normal again, not like just a mother running from something." I looked at her and saw the woman behind the fear. I saw someone tired but strong, someone who had kept going for her children even when it meant losing herself. I was excited too, and I still am. She smiled for the first time that night. It was small, cautious, but real. That smile stayed with me. The hours passed quietly, too quietly. Around midnight, Sophie's phone buzzed. She froze the second she saw the screen. The color drained from her face. "It's him," she whispered. My heart started pounding again. She didn't answer. The phone buzzed again and again. "What do you want to do?" I asked. "I don't know," she said, her voice breaking. "If I don't answer, he'll come looking." I stood up. "Then you won't be alone." She looked at me, confused. "You and the kids can stay here tonight. No one is taking you anywhere." Tears spilled down her cheeks, and she covered her mouth to keep from making a sound. I had not known her long, but in that moment, it felt unthinkable to let fear decide for her. A loud knock suddenly echoed through the apartment hallway. We both froze. Another knock followed, harder this time. My pulse roared in my ears as I walked toward the door, every instinct telling me to protect the people sleeping behind me. "Daniel," Sophie whispered, "please don't open it." I looked back at her, at the woman who had trusted me enough to bring her whole life to my doorstep. "I won't let him scare you," I said quietly. The knocking came again, heavier than before, and that was when I knew this night had crossed a line. Whatever happened next would change all of our lives. I did not open the door. I stood there, my hand resting on the lock, listening to the sound of my own breathing. The knocking stopped, replaced by heavy footsteps pacing outside. My heart felt like it was beating in my throat. I knew that sound. I had heard it once before, years ago, when a man came looking for my late wife at the hospital, angry and loud, demanding answers he did not deserve. Sophie stayed frozen on the couch, her arms wrapped tightly around herself. I walked back to her and knelt in front of her, keeping my voice low. "You and the kids go into the bedroom," I said. "Lock the door." She shook her head. "He knows my voice. He knows how to scare them." "I won't let him near them," I said. Noah stirred and sat up. "Mom?" Sophie hurried to him, pulling him into her arms. Emma woke next, confused and scared. I hated that their rest had been broken again. I hated that fear followed them everywhere. Another knock came, followed by a voice shouting Sophie's name. It was rough and angry. My jaw tightened. I stepped toward the door again, took a breath, and spoke through it. "You need to leave," I said firmly. There was a pause. "Open the door," the voice snapped. "You have no idea who you're dealing with." "I know enough," I replied. "This is private property. If you don't leave, I'm calling the police." Silence followed, then a harsh laugh. The footsteps moved away slowly. I stood still for a long moment, waiting, listening. Finally, headlights swept across the living room walls, then faded into the night. When I turned back, Sophie was crying silently, the kids clinging to her. I sat beside her, careful not to crowd her. "You didn't have to do that," she said. "I wanted to," I replied. That night, none of us slept much. We sat together, talking softly, sharing bits of our lives. Sophie told me how she had met her ex when she was young and hopeful, how his control had crept in slowly until everything felt like a cage. I told her about my wife, how losing her had made me afraid to open my heart again, even to myself. As dawn crept through the blinds, something shifted between us. Not romance yet, trust, the kind that feels rare and fragile. In the morning, I made pancakes. Emma smiled for the first time when she saw the chocolate chips. Noah asked if Jake lived with me. I told him about my son, about how being a father changed everything. Sophie watched me closely, like she was seeing a future she had almost stopped believing in. Later that day, I drove them to a safe place Sophie had arranged, a friend who lived across town. Before she got out of the car, she turned to me. "I don't know why you helped us," she said. I met her eyes. "Because someone once helped me when I needed it most." She reached over and squeezed my hand. That simple touch stayed with me long after she walked away. Days passed, then weeks. Sophie and I texted, sometimes called, always careful, always honest. One evening she told me she had filed for protection. The fear was still there, but so was strength. And then one night she asked if she could come over again, just her this time. When she knocked, I opened the door without fear. She stepped inside, and for the first time, the space between us felt warm instead of heavy. I did not know where this would lead, but I knew one thing. I was no longer just protecting myself. I was choosing to protect something that had quietly become important to my heart. When Sophie came over that night, the apartment felt calmer than it ever had. Not quiet like before, not lonely, but peaceful. She stood by the door for a moment, looking around like she was making sure this was real. I watched her, noticing how her shoulders were no longer tight, how her breath came easier. "Thank you for letting me come," she said. "You never need to ask," I replied. We sat on the couch, closer than before, but not touching. The space between us felt honest. She told me the court had granted a temporary order. Her voice shook when she said it, but there was relief there too. "I'm scared," she admitted, "but I'm not frozen anymore." I nodded. Being scared does not mean you are weak. She smiled at that, a real smile, warm and open. It reached her eyes. Over the next weeks, our lives slowly blended. She met Jake on a sunny Saturday at the park. I worried he would pull back like he always did with new people. Instead, he asked Sophie if she liked soccer and showed her his favorite tricks. Emma and Noah joined us later, running toward their mom with laughter instead of fear. I stood there watching, feeling something settle in my chest. One evening, Sophie stayed for dinner with all the kids. The table was loud and messy, spilled juice, too much talking, laughter bouncing off the walls. I realized I had not felt this kind of full happiness since my wife passed.
It surprised me how gently it arrived. Later, after the kids were asleep, Sophie and I stood on the balcony, the city lights glowing below. The night air was cool. "I never expected this," she said softly. "I thought my story was already written." "I used to think that too," I said. She turned to face me. "I don't want to rush anything. I just want something real." I reached for her hand. She did not pull away. "Real is all I can give." Months passed. Life was not perfect. There were hard talks, bad memories, moments when fear knocked again, but we faced them together. Sophie grew stronger. I learned how to love without holding back. The kids built routines. Jake taught Noah how to ride a bike. Emma braided Sophie's hair before school. One evening, after putting the kids to bed, Sophie rested her head on my chest. The room was quiet, but not empty. "Do you remember the first night?" she asked. "How could I forget?" I replied. "You were sure you would turn me away." "I almost did," I admitted honestly. She looked up at me. "What changed your mind?" I thought for a moment. "You didn't come alone. You came brave. That mattered." Tears filled her eyes, and she kissed me gently. It was slow, careful, full of promise. A year later, we stood in the same doorway where everything started. Not waiting, not afraid, just present. The kids ran past us into the living room, their laughter filling the space. Sophie squeezed my hand and whispered, "I'm glad you opened the door." I smiled. So am I. That night, after the lights were off and the house was finally still, I realized something important. Love did not arrive how I planned. It arrived when I chose not to walk away. And that choice changed all of our lives.